quite incredible to have Dr. Ariyaratne with us. The first time I read about him was 9 years back in a book I picked up at a second-hand bookstore called Following the Footsteps of the Mahatma. So there was a story of Dalai Lama and Dr. Ariyaratne, and I was like, will I ever get to meet somebody like this? And 2 years back he was at Nipun's place. Some of you know Nipun. And that talk, I still remember everything he said. It was incredible stuff. Amongst the stories I remember he shared last time was how he attended an international conference in Hawaii, and he's taking a break, he's just walking, and someone, a kid comes up to him with something in his hand, and he just smiles at the kid, and the kid just looks back at him, confused, and walks away. And then later he realizes that the kid was actually showing a pistol at him. It was kind of a hold-up situation, but it never occurred to him that the kid was trying to harm him. So he just smiled, and the kid was completely confused and left. And so this is the space he operates in. He just faces these situations all the time, and I hope he will share stories about the 100,000 people meditating in Sri Lanka. More than 100,000 people. When I was coming, he was telling me, I can't believe it. We're like 100 people, there's so many of us, and 100,000 meditating together. There are some 950,000. 900. Like, alright, blows my mind. So I can't even imagine how much that is. So we'll have stories from him.
Thank you very much for that noble silence we had for about 45 minutes. I call it noble silence because we can have silence which is not noble also. We can close our eyes, think of all our enemies, think all the acquisitions I am yet to make, think of what I have already accumulated, whether they are safe at home or not, by being silent. That is not noble silence. Noble silence is you look at a particular spot in your body. Mostly people look at their breathing in and out, because from the moment we are born till we die, this physical operation, breathing in and out, takes place in us. So for a moment we relax our body from head to foot. We relax every muscle in our body, thinking this body with which I am identified is nothing but a very temporary coming together of certain elements, hardness or matter, liquidity, water, air, heat in space. This is all we have in this body. When it is functioning and alive, these faculties begin to work. Our eyes, we have eye contacts, eye sensations, that is an object falling into my eye and I sense it. Based on that, I immediately recognize it for perception. So contact, sensation, perception. Then I immediately give a thought, I like it, I don't like it, or neutral. So we create a thought, and all these things go to our consciousness. So from the birth till this moment, we have had so much of information getting through our eyes Similarly, through our ears, through our nose, smell, through our tongue, our body and our mind itself. Because over and over again the mind contemplates on these things we have experienced from the five senses. So silence in the six senses and removing what have been accumulated in this mind is one purpose of meditation. So we try to relax our body first, then understand that the living body can all the time be disturbed by these external elements that will come into our consciousness through our five senses and the mind itself. And if we can silence the mind for a moment, say when we do anapanasati or looking at the breathing in and out, how the breath behaves, if the mind runs to something, some object that falls onto the eye or to the ear or to any other senses, and if we can say, no, I am not, I look at it, but do not create any thought, let it go, let go. Then we can come to a point where we really slowly begin to silence our mind. And then if we are careful and if we are skillful, we can get the mind to stop talking silently. In other words, while we are closing our eyes and absolutely silence externally, internally we are not silent. Mind is slow it down. Completely stop talking inwardly. That kind of exercise is common to all spiritual teachings, whatever the origin may be, whoever the teachers may be. Therefore we spent few minutes in that kind of silence. So I was very happy. I didn't want to disturb that silence. So he told me, why don't you guide those who are fresh? I thought, much better to keep silent. But I would advise those who are beginning, confine yourself to about 20 minutes first. For experienced meditators, it can be even hours and days, it doesn't matter. But at the beginning, 20-minute periods are fine. Anyway, daily, if we can in the morning and evening lay aside 20 minutes each time, just to bring about this kind of silence in the mind, that will be very effective, particularly for those who are exercising their brain so much in the modern retail and wholesale exercise called education. Because in most of the educational institutions, you educate everything except your mind, which is very sad. I haven't seen this in American universities. You may see it better. You may know better. But in my own country, more time is spent fighting, demonstrating, demanding rather than learning. In the 16 odd universities we have, hardly any day passes without one university or the other being closed down. That is because this aspect is ignored. And I was very happy to hear that a Sarvodaya unit group have been formed in Stanford. I think I'm very, very happy about it. having devoted my whole life, over 50 years, to this one concept called Sarvodaya. A word that Mahatma Gandhi coined, Sarvam Udaya. Sarvam means embracing everything, all. Udaya means for the well-being of all. Now in Sri Lanka, as our language also, both Sinhala and Tamil, we also had a influence from Sanskrit. We could easily adopt this word Sarvodaya or Sarvodayam. In other words, for all the people in the country, there was one common word and a common objective for which, in spite of all the problems you have in society, you could devote your time. So today maybe the Sarvodaya movement in Sri Lanka, which has all communities, all religious groups in it, working like one family, may be the only hope to heal the wounds that have been created by 30 years of unnecessary bloodshed in our country. So I'm so happy that you have started this movement, this work. We expect to bring about change at 6 levels. Also we expect to bring about changes in 6 sectors. What are the 6 levels we have to bring about change? Firstly, we have to bring about a change in human personalities. We call it personality awakening. We call it Paurushodaya. Paurusha is the personality. Awakening the human personality. Without the objective of human personality awakening, any kind of knowledge being imparted or acquired is counterproductive. In the very first sermon of the Buddha, he used 5 words which I would call of great educational significance. Chakku mudapadi, awaken your eyes. What he meant was the vision. But it can also mean awakening your 5 senses. Because we acquire most of the knowledge from these senses. Then he said, Jnana mudapadi. Awaken the knowledge. Acquire as much knowledge as you can from these faculties. An acquisition of knowledge was not the end product, was not the only thing he hoped. Convert this knowledge to awaken the wisdom in you, panya udapadi. Awaken the wisdom in you. When you awaken the wisdom in you, then your real scientific attitudes, scientific methods come into your mind. You begin to look at things in a very scientific way, not the kind of sciences which do not have anything to do with the mind. This has very much to do with the mind too. So Vidya Udapadi, awaken the science in you. When you do that, there is an awakening of the light in you. Aloka Udapadi, may there be light. These 5 words he used in his very first sermon to the 5 monks who came to listen to him, the first 5 ever to listen to Buddha after he attained enlightenment. So this kind of spiritual awakening is necessary for every human being, the personality awakening. So if we probe or study deep into religious teachings, we can easily select a few principles or teachings that would help us in day-to-day life. As a teacher, when this movement was started, along with our students at Nalanda College, Colombo, a lot of people started asking us what educational use these students have when they go to rural areas, poverty-stricken villages, live with the village people, cook with them, eat with them, sing with them, discuss with them, meditate with them. What is the use for these students? Because for them education was only possible within a classroom, with textbooks, with an examination orientation, and of course a job orientation also. That's all. But here they asked us this question. So we had to tell them, being a Buddhist school, we could easily give the answer from the Buddha's teachings. He said, we are taking these students because at school they learn loving kindness is a very good thing. Here they get an opportunity to practice it. When they sit down like this, bring their thoughts into a point where you concentrate. Then when you give that loving kindness to your own body, then to your mother, father, family members, people who are near and dear to you, extend that loving kindness, then to the entire humanity and the entire living world, then you become one with the entire universe. Buddha said the way that a mother would look after her one and only child at the risk of her life, extend loving kindness to the entire living world. You see what a profound idea that loving kindness is. So we are taking these students so that they can experience this loving kindness with poorest village communities. And not only go and mix up with them, but work with them. They have no wells for clean water. So we dig wells with them. We construct roads with them. We put up houses with them. We construct toilets and things, sanitation facilities with them. All these things are nothing but loving kindness put into compassionate action. So that is the second quality Buddha preached, metta then karuna. When they do that, these students know that they will never use those toilets or drink water from those wells. They will do this job, go back after the camp is over. But they get a joy of living which they will remember all their life. And they will know the feelings of kind of altruistic joy they get, dispassionate joy they get, will never be forgotten by them in their life. So when they do this kind of work, some people will laugh at it. Some people will praise. They learn to develop equanimity, upekkha. So this is why we took these students to the villages. We told them. I am not going to elaborate on that. This is one. Personality awaken of the human being. That's the first level. Second level is we are living in a world where the family is getting so degenerated. Family members are somehow, that cohesiveness, that unity is disappearing. And some people think that it's a sign of progress, sign of development. I remember I was in England with my brother long years ago. There was a sick person in the front house, old man. I also used to go and see him. My brother used to do whatever he could. He died. All that the son did was to come and pay the bill to the undertakers and go away. We were shocked. Is this the kind of development and progress you are making in human society? Where you have lost your links, your love, your connection, your affinity to your parents, your children, brothers, sisters. So our second objective in the Sarvodaya movement is to awaken the families. We try to keep the families together, try to help them to practice sharing, pleasant language, constructive activity and equality in association. This is very, very necessary. Third level of awakening is community awakening. Whether we like it or not, even though we may say that our world is so urbanized, no, we cannot bring people together. This is an urban environment, but here how many people have come together here? I can see over 100 here. If you want, you can bring people together. You can build communities if you have the will. And there must be good leaders to do that. People who understand far into the future. So people with vision everywhere in the world can easily bring groups together for constructive purposes. Not only for games, not only for destructive work, not only for external enjoyment, but for inner joy, inner education. People can be brought together. That is how you are here together. So third level is from the human individual to the family to the group or the community. And these communities are there all over the world. But first the national level. So both rural and urban awakening of communities and national level awakening. Now in Sri Lanka we are doing this with 15,000 communities in Sri Lanka. And these communities are practicing these principles and trying to achieve these objectives to the best of their ability. And this is not a normal thing happening in our society. This is something different. So it's very difficult for alternative economics or politics or education or such other things to be practiced in modern society. But we have done it for 50 odd years. So now, even amidst the terrible war that took place, our friendships between people who do not believe in violence, who do not believe in sectarian differences, who don't believe in caste, race, religion or national divisions among people, we were able to keep that alive even through a 30-year period. That's why today we can make a better contribution than the government, UN or anybody else to bring together people of our country, which we are doing. So, personality awakening of the individual, awakening of the family, awakening of the rural community, awakening of the urban community, awakening of the national community, and awakening of the world community. Now for these six, we coined 6 words. Sarvodaya has therefore Paurushodaya, Kutumbodaya, Gramodaya, Nagarodaya, Deshodaya, Vishwodaya. These are more or less commonly used by Sinhala and Tamil people now, because those are the 2 major communities in our country. Now these 6 levels of awakening have to take place, I said, in six integrated sectors. Spiritual sector I mentioned. From spirituality flows morality. So when within our mind we have always the intention of not doing evil, cultivating good, purifying our mind, when we have that kind of thing, our relationships with others will not be based on competition or jealousy or hatred. Our relationship with others will be based on love, fraternity, cooperation, helping one another. So we will not participate in anything that degenerate human life. Drinking, taking alcohol, taking drugs, going into gambling, going into such other activities which are normally said to be immoral. So there is a moral reawakening that is taking place as a result of the meditation. This is the second area where we have to develop. Third area is culture. Culture, we have defined it for our purposes, is all those activities we do to nourish our body, nourish our mind, emotions and whatever needs. When all those things are put together, we call it the culture. So it changes from community to community. But these cultures, if they are based on spiritual and moral factors, then that kind of culture is a real, true culture. In our parts of the world, in India, in Sri Lanka, we call it Sanskrutiya. Sanskrutiya is the formation based on these values. So based on a spiritual, moral and cultural foundation, we have to build social, political and economic institutions. When you say social institutions, institutions pertaining to education, health, conflict resolution, peace building, leadership, community building, all these things in the social sector come in. So we have to concentrate and awaken people to that kind of social awakening. That is the fourth. Fifth one is the economic. Today we are studying economics. We are writing books on economics. We give masters, PhDs and all that in economics. And we have economic pundits all over the world. And the best of them are recruited by the World Bank. And they have been struggling and struggling for the last so many years to eradicate poverty. But they have increased poverty all over the world. They have taught how the rich could become richer and the poor could, without any effort, become poorer. So that is the economics we have in our world today. Because fundamentally these economics that have taken the upper hand in world society, they are more than production and more than rendering services. The cumulative value of those things are much less than the monies that the banks have created and brought about this economic collapse in many countries. That is bad economics. So we have to think how we can have a kind of economic in that sector also, an awakening which will bring some sanity, some ethics into the economic operations that are taking place in our communities, our countries and in the world. So another objective of Sarvodaya is a different kind of economics. Now Mahatma Gandhi talked about trusteeship. And when Swami Vivekananda came to America, he came without a cent. He just went to a ship and said, "Can you give me a lift?" And I joined him and said, "Yes." "What about your food?" "I have nothing, I am a sannyasi, I am a monk." wandering monk. I don't touch money. Somehow he found his way to New York. He found his way to Chicago, World Parliament of Religions. And when Swami Vivekananda and his friend Anagadi Dharmapala from Sri Lanka, both of them got onto the platform and spoke, everybody was amazed. For the first time, wisdom, Buddhism and Hinduism came to the attention of the Western scholars and religionists. They became very famous. While this was happening, Lord Rockefeller had a heart attack. He thought, now these two people who have come from the East are mystics. These two must be able to cure me. So messengers were sent. Anagarika went for another thing. To Hawaii he came, yes. He came to Lord Rockefeller. He asked him, can you cure me? Certainly, sir, I can cure you. My heart attack? Yes, you will never get another heart attack till you die. Till you obey me. Yeah? I'll prescribe. He said, can you, at this very moment, give your proprietary ownership, give up your proprietary ownership to all your wealth? That is, he asked how much. Because all these people ask how much, you know. For them money is the God. So, when he was asked how much, he said, nothing short of your entire wealth I need. Then before he could get a heart attack again, he said, you know, I am a Swami, I am a sannyasi, I don't touch money. I want you to be a trustee of all your wealth from today. You get whatever you want to the maximum to your family, your other needs, not to your greed. Enough. And the others form into a trust. And the trust was formed. And he lived his full length of life. And Swami did not charge. You know. So, Mahatma Gandhi's idea of trusteeship was also like what Swami Vivekananda before Gandhi practiced. So, getting the clues from those in these very difficult times, all your brains, in Stanford, in Harvard, in all these places, young brains, because our brains are now too rusted, too conditioned by what we learn from our textbooks. I'm going to say the same thing in Harvard. I had to give a talk there next week. I don't know whether I'll be chased out, but I'll say that. You have to find a new way out. We can't allow in an affluent world for the vast majority of people to go to bed without food. We can't allow this, whether they are called IDPs or other kind of refugees, we can't allow these millions of people to live in refugee camps, maybe 100 million. In my country itself, there may be close upon 500,000. What is the use of all these economics if we cannot find a solution to the problem of poverty, hunger and want? That is the fifth level, fifth component of a reawakening in this world. Last is the political. We have inherited one of the worst political systems in civilization. Party and power politics. You get yourself organized into a party, spend millions of rupees through media to lie to the people, get power, and do exactly what you want after that. Enrich your families, enrich your friends. This is in in very simple language, the politics taking place all over the world with the exception of maybe America. You can't. I'm speaking in America, so I should not criticize. In my country, this is so. So, sometimes people use this mockery called democratic elections to come into power. Some use guns to come into power. Now in Nepal, for example, when they couldn't get it guns, they laid aside guns and joined the government. He is from Nepal, my friend Shishir, with the executive director of Sarvodaya in USA. So, we had to find an alternative system of governance, good governance. Unlike in the past, most people in the world are now getting educated. In my country, almost 100% are literate. Almost 100%. So if genuinely people can be educated, they will understand. Is there an alternative system of democratic politics without this hatred mongering, greed oriented, corrupt party and power political system? Mahatma Gandhi talked about village republics. In the time of the Buddha, there were Vajjis and Lichavis. They were told to be republics, people's republics, which even big emperors could not defeat them. We tried it in Sri Lanka. Already we have in 3,000 villages. We have established self-governing village units. They are not legally recognized, but that will follow one day. We should not wait till constitutions are changed and parliaments pass these laws. For example, he was telling about meditation we did. As we have so many thousands of villages where we are working, it's not difficult to get a few hundred or few thousand people together. We had meditations with 20,000 at a time. Then somebody said, "Sir, why don't we have 100,000? But fine, 100,000. So we had to find a place, but we have in our ancient cities, we have big parks and places. Okay, we had 100,000. Then some clever fellow said, why don't we do with 300,000 in the city of Colombo, our capital city, so all the elite class can see. Excellent, we will do it. So we told the police that there will be people coming, and police won't take Sarvodaya as a mischievous organization. They think they are responsible. So when there are hundreds of busloads of people coming to the city, police started getting worried because there's a war going on in the north, whether some of them will come in these buses, So they got down from the buses and 2 by 2 they walked into the big park, central park called Vihara Mahadevi Park in Colombo. They came and they sat down and 300,000 were there. So police sent 300 people, armed policemen, to give us security. Nobody looked at them. Nobody, because we didn't need orders from anybody. There was a place given to park the vehicle, that's all we needed. So I went to the commander of the troops. I said, how many have come with you to give us security? 300. I said, 300 is not enough. No, we have 300,000. That means for each one of you, how many? 1,000 can catch you. So I can speak like that in my own country because they have some kind of little respect for me. Some respect. Yeah, but they won't take me amiss. So I said, I will be leading the meditation. I'll do it for 1 hour. When the meditation starts, you get the troops to turn their guns backwards, close their eyes and start meditating. He said, I'll do that, sir. I'll do that. You don't worry. I said, because nobody is going to attack these non-violent people dressed in white. There's a video also. I'll leave one with you, one day you can show it to them. So, meditating, and these chaps are meditating. Some clever correspondents, newspaper men had more than taking the pictures of the meditators, had taken the pictures of the forces meditating, who came to give security. So we must treat with absolute, I don't know the English word, absolute, we should use a good word also, no?
What is the local word?
No. That is not to take them seriously. Indifference. Treat them with indifference and do our job. That's one way of tackling militarization of countries. Now, we did that meditation. Then after that they said, shall we do a meditation with 1 million people? I said, okay. Go ahead. So 2 years ago, we called for 1 million to come together. And from here also there were Reverend Michael Beckwith was there, Professor John Amacy was there, several were there from here also. They also went and joined. Unfortunately, some mischief makers wanted to prevent that meditation taking place, so they threw a bomb at my house. And the bombs have no brains. But this particular bomb had a brain, not to fall on our house. It fell on the wall, so nothing happened to us. That made more people come for the meditation when newspapers published this. So, we had that number together. It was not 1 million, it was less than 1 million because some roads were closed for some security reasons at that time. But it's easily over 900,000. And when you have, this is what I want to tell you, when you have this kind of silence, the greater the number, if the silence can be not only just being silent, but silencing the 6 senses, it can have a terrific impact on the environment. Even the birds and animals and human beings, the drivers, they will not blow a horn. They don't know what's happening. They don't see this, but affecting the human consciousness. So those of us who have no power, military power, political power, money power or media power, as we don't have these things, this is a much more powerful thing to influence the consciousness of the people as a whole. So if a critical mass of consciousness, critical mass of spiritual consciousness could be created, that is how to transform the world. Therefore the Sarvodaya objective is at 6 levels with these 6 sectors to build a new world. So you are doing a fine thing by doing Sarvodaya at Stanford. I stop here now, wishing you all the very best. Ask me any questions if you have.
If you have a mic, that will... We have a mic, so we'll pass this around for questions. And tell us your name and then ask your question.
Good evening, my name is Olga. Thank you very much for sharing. My question is not spiritual, it's more sociological.
No?
I would like to find out how exactly you were able to mobilize million people. What means of communication? Because I understand that the region has its own challenges to communicate certain messages. So it would be very interesting to find out, because it's a beautiful result, obviously. I wonder what was the process to prepare that to happen.
Well, I would say that we have worked for 50 years. We started from one village. Then after 2-3 years, it became 100 villages. Then after maybe another few years, 1,000 villages, like that. So 10,000 villages, then 15,000 villages. So we stopped at that, but many more villages are working on these lines. So in a village, we have a 5-stage development, where we first do certain activities by gifting our labor. It psychologically brings people together and their consciousness is awakened. Then we get children, women, youth and other into formations where they are all related to what they call the basic needs program. Basic need for a clean and beautiful environment, a clean and adequate supply of water, simple clothing, food requirements, housing, health, energy requirements, education, spiritual and cultural needs, communication, like that. So these 10 basic needs we satisfy by our own self-reliance and hard work. If government or others help us, fine. Then we get these villages incorporated as societies. So there are, under the registrar of companies and societies, we make them legal entities. It is to prevent the government nationalizing us. One of the great things that our governments do, particularly socialists, they are called socialists, I don't know what socialism they have, to nationalize everything. I am for people's ownership, but nationalizing is quite different. But when you have thousands of societies, they cannot confiscate all our societies. Right? Then the whole country has to be confiscated. So we have a legal entity in the village. Then of course from there we go to this Gram Swarajya, village self-government stage. So it's a question of giving telephone calls to our district centers, there are 36 of them, and the divisional centers, there are 355 of them. Then there are 16 independent organizations which were made independent nationally by Sarvodaya to them. So within a week, easily 100,000 can be brought together without posting a postcard. Within 2 weeks, maybe more. Certainly within a month, 1 million. Without spending much. So it's a communication system we have. Now of course we are modernizing. We are giving computer training, internet are being fixed, people are coming and competing to give us a internet system and training, and everybody thinks that this is a good thing we are doing. Even the government thinks it's a good thing.
Hi, my name is Jasmine. I'm over here. Hi. So I was curious as to how you distinguish morality versus spirituality, in the sense like what constitutes spirituality, what constitutes morality, and how do these two things intersect?
Spirituality has no labels. There is no Buddhist spirituality, Christian spirituality or Hindu. This is my opinion. Spirituality is a state of mind where no pollutants are there in your heart. It's clear the whole. Morality, some call it Buddhist love, Christian love, Hindu love, I don't believe in that. love is love. Right? So, unfortunately, some moral principles have been too identified with labels. When you label anything, it brings about a division. So morality is a much lower level to spirituality. The spiritually awakening person will never utter a lie. Say, if my objective is to be spiritually awakened, now say, if a Buddhist wants to achieve he has to perfect dana or beneficence. He has to have sila or morality. He has to have detachment, or you detach yourself from everything. He has to develop wisdom. He has to have effort. He has to develop forgiveness. Like that, there are 10 principles. So every time now I come here, I speak to you, and at the end of it I feel very happy, and I feel that I have given a dana. I have practiced one of those beneficence. Some say one of you is scolding me. Then I don't take it to heart. Then I see here that he gave me an opportunity to practice non-hatred. Right? So everything, good or bad, coming to us, we can deeply look at it and not allow it to influence our human awakening. So there is not much difference between these two except the labels we attach. But spirituality is all embracing. Spirituality has everything. One day, into a Christian church in a desert close to Rome, when Roman Empire took over everything, some of those fathers went into the jungle because they wanted to be alone. And sometimes some thieves came and put them into a room, locked them up, took everything. So when the fathers got out, they found they have not taken something. They have not taken everything. Some things are forgotten by them. So fathers ran after them and gave it to them. Those fellows were so upset, they came, brought back everything they stole. That's how morality will not react. Reaction is always bad. Never react to anything. Respond. Respond means after intelligent thinking.
Hello, my name is Michael. So in communities that surround these educational institutions, where very much the people we interact with on a day-to-day basis do have their basic needs met, how is it that we can communicate that it is still in our best interest to gather for this form of awakening that you've been talking about?
You see, our schooling system is entirely the government monopoly. Now, actually in the United States, I was feeling a little bit amazed to see about the health debate. Do you know from the birth, not from the birth, from pregnancy till death, everything in my country is free. Even a heart transplant is free. You don't have to pay anything. So insurance companies can't play the fool. But then there are private hospitals now coming up because those days medical services, health services were a service like education. Now both education, health, medicine, all these things have become big money-making enterprises. So, still for all, the government health system in our country, right from the time of independence, have been free. So if I want to do a bypass, only thing is in a government hospital you have to wait because there are so many. In a private hospital you can get it done if you have the money. So schools are therefore government owned, but there are private schools also now. Now, Sarvodaya run only preschools, but help children to attend school and see that 100% of the children are attending school. That we do. Then children between 14 to about 18, we have peace brigades in every village where those children can join and learn Sarvodaya. So there are at any time about 130,000 young people in these peace brigades. Each brigade had one leader and 10 others. So in a village, these people can, when a message is given, they'll go from house to house and educate the people.
My name's Linda. I have two questions together. To me, they're related. The first question is, the Buddha didn't try to mobilize the monks to go out and alleviate poverty, and the Buddha, the original Buddha, didn't really try to mobilize his followers to go out and alleviate poverty and, do the kind of work, the rural development that you're doing and so on. He more or less told them to renounce the world and meditate. So the first question is, how do you understand the difference between what you're doing and what he apparently did, and why it came up at this historical moment, this engaged Buddhism? And or should I just stop? I have another question which is complementary. So you have a huge organization, and we've often seen that organizations get into trouble. They have hierarchies, conflicts of interest, power struggles, fights over resources, money, decisions, etc. You have anything like that?
Well, second question first. If the person who symbolizes the organization or the persons who symbolize the organization become non-attached, become detached. For example, 10 years ago, I told our General Assembly when they met, from today, I cease to be administering anything in this organization. I stand out. I won't touch money, I won't give appointments to anybody. Everything is there now. You people have to do it. Then everybody shouted, no, as long as you live, you have to be the president. Don't you know Asian culture? I said, okay, I will be the president, but I will not preside. I will be the leader, but I will not lead. At most, I will be a community educator. I love that, like this. I meet at least 8 to 10,000 people every week, somewhere in the country. And hardly come to Colombo. On the first I had to go there, but the Chamber of Commerce want me to tell what to do now after the war. I generally go to the cities. I go to the rural areas and meet people. So, still they got me elected. So once a month there is an executive council meeting. There are 75 people meet. Then the officials meeting 11 people. They are the daily board. Both I have to preside, but I don't preside. There are 8 vice presidents, one of them presides. For the last 10 years I have not presided at any meeting. But I am the president. So that way I have shown that. We have never had an election in the organization. So when we elect 75 members, now December 5th, we will have our next general meeting, 52nd meeting. 75 will get elected. Then we say any others who want to attend. Executive meetings can come here on the last Saturday of the month. So nobody needs to compete. That way we have, second thing is we have given the authority to the lowest ground level. It's not a hierarchy from top to down. Though we have an executive director, directors for different departments and regional directors and directors for districts and divisions, still they meet regularly, once a month, once in 2 months, 2 weeks, once in the whole group once in 3 months in those regions. So that way we are keeping, like the Vajjins of those days, Buddha's time, meet frequently, meet peacefully, discuss peacefully and disperse peacefully. So far it has happened, I don't know what will happen tomorrow. Next thing is, with regard to the first question, first question was...
It was just about the difference between what we understand that the Buddha did.
Yes. You know, Buddha should not be taken as a recluse who preached only for the next birth. Buddha was very much like the modern day activists in a different way. Every day he walked, every day he met people, every day when he went to some place, he found a young man worshipping this side, 10 directions he was worshipping. So Buddha asked him, what are you doing? He said, my father when he died asked me to worship this. Don't be silly. There must be some reason. Didn't you ask him? No. Then Buddha explained to him, these are the 10 directions, what your father meant. So now, he never told him to meditate, oh, these are the 4 noble truths, this is the noble eightfold path, and this is vipassana meditation, nothing of the sort. You do this. And then, of course, when that man started practicing what Buddha said, and he ran to the Buddha and said, Buddha, can you tell me how to put an end to this cycle of births and deaths? Then he did this. Now here, when he asked me to come here, I sat down. I was not given any commands what I should do. So he put me down here and he went away. Then he was doing this. I was silent because I was not asked. Unless Buddha was asked, he never uttered a word. I am not a Buddha, but I followed the principle. So there were many instances where he fed the hungry before he preached. And he goes to a place, somebody asks, I am engaged in this economic activity. Can you give some advice? Okay, I will give you advice. He taught economics. Utthana Sampada. You should put all your heart and soul and do an efficient job in production. It may be agriculture, it may be industry, whatever. Then he said, when you produce, remember there are non-renewable stuff. Don't destroy them, because for our life support systems, these things are necessary. So use them, like our recycling today. So conservation factor he preached. Utthana Sampada, Arakka Sampada, Samajivakata. He said, don't produce for people's greed. Produce for people's needs. Mahatma Gandhi said that people have everything to satisfy their needs, but not their greed. One man's greed cannot be satisfied with the entire world's wealth. That's very true. Buddha said that. Fourth thing he said, it's not enough. Efficiency in production, preserving what you produce or the raw material or whatever it is, and producing what people need. It's also essential that You people who are engaged in production, distribution, whatever, must have kalyana mitrata, that is real friendship. Supposing a person takes the salary away, drinks and does not go home and give the wife and children what they need except drinking with that, then the others should tell him this is all wrong. Boycott him, teach him this money is not meant for you to drink. That is kalyana mitrata. Like modern trade unions. So Buddha, there are many instances. Also Buddha said simply because you are trying to earn money, don't neglect your spiritual life. So he was not against people earning money. He was against people earning money by wrong means. So he said don't earn money by killing, prostitution, selling armaments, drugs like that. So what we are doing, Buddha did the spiritual mission more than anything else. We are doing maybe moral, cultural, social, economic, political missions and also a little bit of spiritual mission. I wish if I could spend my whole time for spiritual work.
Hi, Rajiv Babu. I have got two questions about your organization and the environment. You said that militants have not attacked and the terrorists have not attacked the Sarvodaya until now. And you called it lucky that they haven't done it. But the reason militants thrive is that they want those resources from the populace. That's how they survive. And you have such a large organization, which is a large chunk of their resource center. That is one side of the story. And the second is that human nature, what it is. When you have such a large organization, people who want power or are corrupt or who are wrong in this will come into the organization one way or the other. You cannot stop everyone in 2 million people from rising up. So, but obviously, when you say that these have not happened, that means somewhere that organization is self-controlling, self-doing that these things don't happen. Now, what is that? Because I have not captured that from your answers as to how that organization is ensuring that these things don't happen.
Do you understand?
Yeah, I will shorten it. Basically, why it is not happening? That the
What is not happening?
The militants are not attacking, and the corruption or power struggle in your organization is not happening.
Yeah.
What is that which is in the culture of the DNA of your organization?
Actually, I don't know why they did not attack us. Once our leader in Jaffna was killed, Kadramale. So with his dead body I went and called them publicly, please kill me, I am the cause of that. None came forward. Not that I'm trying to paint myself as a hero, but here this man meditated with me under a Bodhi tree. I said, Kadramale, have you got any problem in going back to Jaffna? He said, no, sir. He went back to Jaffna. They came to his office. They physically dragged him out of the office. He was taken to some cemetery, asked him to dig his own grave. He was taken to a lamp post. He was asked to tie the knot there, and he was asked to put the noose around his neck. They shot him down and went away. So our leader was killed. So don't say that. They spared us. They didn't spare anybody who did not sign with them. That is why they came to that kind of miserable end. In 1960, 83, after the big riots I went there. I was the only Sinhalese to go to the north. And all these people were there, including the leader. I said, please, let us resolve this non-violence. Otherwise thousands and thousands of people are trying to get killed. Will get killed, and it happened. This government is also at fault. I said, I am going to walk from the deepest south, a temple, to the deep north as a peace walk. We started it. There were 30,000 people the very first day. Then our president came and stopped it. Not stopped it, he made a public request that my life is in danger. Therefore, I said, I don't care if I care for my life, I wouldn't have done this work all these years. I don't mind anybody killing me. But when an executive president of a country makes a public request like that, when the BBC, CNN, all these international media are there, people will think that if I refuse, that I am so arrogant. All the newspapers would have carried headlines, Ariyaratne's arrogance prevents him from listening to the president. I didn't want to fall into that situation. I said, all right. And everybody was so mad when I said, yes. But I continued with a few others on the slide, right to the very end. Then there was a Japanese monk who was left. I told the Japanese monk, now get back. He refused. He was shot dead coming from behind the following day. So it was not an environment conducive to peacemaking, but for somehow or other, I think they appreciated the work we were doing. When there were victims of war, we didn't care whether they were Sinhalese, Tamils, military or LTT or anybody. We gave them relief, and we publicly announced our movement is doing 5 things. 5 R's: relief, rehabilitation, reconciliation, reconstruction and reawakening. So today there are 300,000 in IDP camps in Vavuniya. No organization is allowed to enter there. The government is doing everything. Some UN organizations are allowed to go. But Sarvodaya is there. Right from January when the refugees started coming, I said go forcefully. Even if you are not welcome, say we want to serve. So they are all Tamil young people, very, very motivated people. From Shanti Sena, Peace Brigade, 300 are working there. They can enter at 6 in the morning and they have to leave before 6 in the evening. So we are helping nutrition, water, medical care, everything needed to be done in those cases. A terrible situation to start with, now much improved. I am not blaming anybody for the state there, because it's not easy to deal with 300,000 people. So all we could do was to do our maximum and press the government. So 3 or 4 organizations helped us, including organization here. The director I just met before coming here 15 minutes ago, Flora Foundation, who had sent $15,000 what we were doing, but in all we have spent over $300,000 so far just to feed and look after. Then 400 children are born in 2 hospitals in those camps every month. Imagine a desert-like place. When it rains, it's muddy. How can these mothers keep the children? So my wife and others, some doctors went there, found out the best ways to make some cots. So we started making cots in our workshop. Now 800 cots, over 400 have been delivered, the others are being made, and people came and voluntarily gave money for these cots from the south. So like that we are doing, so they know that what we are doing is not harmful. Earlier they committed crimes against us. Indian Army shot 7 of our workers by mistake. I would have been shot if not for a military major who was brave enough. I was talking to some Tamil youth in the Tamil area, Vatiklo. This fellow suddenly came, he didn't know Tamil, he didn't know English, he knew only Hindi. So he came and pointed a gun at me. I smiled, and because I was talking to youth, they thought I was one of the terrorists, Then somebody came, he was a general in the, another colonel in the army. He took that gun aside and told, your commander wants him to come for dinner. And the Indian commander in charge of the IPK heard I was in that area. So, we had to risk, you can't. But I don't think they had anything against me personally. Well, originally that mistake was done. But we never pursued it and tried to take revenge from them or anything. After all, anybody taking to violence means they are misled. Whether governments using violence or others. I don't approve violence, but anybody.
My name is Prakash.
Yes.
First of all, really heartfelt gratitude to you. Thanks to you and thanks to Sarvodaya at Stanford for bringing you here. Since I have the mic, I'll make the question in two parts. One is Mahatma Gandhi. If you could share some inspiration that you have drawn from, his way of life, or he says his life was the message. What is that inspired you? And the second part is how did it all start? Like, what kindled your spiritual, yearning or that urge? That is that because that you saw a lot of misery and injustice, poverty, or anything in particular that really kindled that light in you? Thank you. And I would also say that wish everyone happy Deepavali, and I think it's so befitting that you really, Deepavali is to celebrate that victory of good over evil and remove the ignorance through the knowledge. And I think this is such a wonderful that we are having you and inspire us on the occasion of Deepavali. Thank you.
There are two areas where we in Asia, and before Constantinople, even the church here believed. First thing, this is not our only birth. We all are in a cycle of births and deaths. We had a previous birth, we may have another birth unless we completely destroy that energy that creates another life. Karma. So maybe previous life I was doing these things, and maybe I have been with Gandhi and other great leaders and followed them, and maybe it's inherited from the previous birth. Three things can influence our personality. This is the karma, past karma, good karma. I have done good karma to be able to do good things in this life. Second thing is the environment in which you are born. Now I was born to a very religious family, religious environment, Buddhist parents, who were not poor but at the same time they were not rich. They were middle class people who helped their brothers and sisters in the village. Maybe about 20% of our villagers were middle class, about 5% very rich who didn't help anybody, and then other 75% poor. So my parents helped the poor. So I got some kind of inspiration from them and the temple. When I was about 16, I started helping the village people, starting village workers, cooperatives and all that, while still I was attending college. So environment helped me. Thirdly, your own mind. I had so much experience with poor villagers. One day in a, what you call Dalit, Vedda community, when I was visiting that village, I had a woman crying in agony in a hut. Husband dressed in a loin cloth with a little hatchet was there. I said, what's happening? Why is that woman crying in agony? He said, you are going back to a child. So I said, surely you must be having a midwife in this area. He said, we have to walk 18 miles to get a midwife. I said, where are the other women and others in the village? They all have gone to the tailors for their cultivation. Why are you waiting with this hatchet? To cut the umbilical cord, you know. So I thought, what is the use of my education? My becoming a civil servant, a professor in a university or anything. And this kind of people are there in my country. One thing I saw. Another thing I saw in the same area was a family trying to walk to the hospital. Accidentally, the leg went under a railway. They were walking on a railway line. They couldn't take the leg out. And the train came, they couldn't stop and lost this leg. I saw these two incidents and several more. It slowly changed me. I thought I will study. I will be second to none in my studies. I will do it very well. At the same time, after my studies, I will turn this society upside down to the best of my ability, so that it becomes a society that works for all. So when these things are happening in 1956, for the first time, I had an opportunity to visit India, and it is there that I came to know what Mahatma Gandhi had done. I started reading. Then again I went back and finished my money. Again I collected money and came back. The second visit I met Vinoba Bhave, Gandhi's disciple, because Gandhiji has died by that time. And then with him I walked a few miles, talked to him. Then later I was not admitted to the Gandhian hierarchy in the big temples of Delhi, because I was a young fellow. When I got the Magsaysay Award, Gandhi Peace Award, everybody was behind me, that's a different matter. But at that time, enthusiastic young fellow who was interested to learn Gandhian philosophy was not admitted to the Gandhian bureaucracies like any other organization. That's why in my case, if anybody wants to come and meet me, if it is big people, they have to get appointment. A beggar or such person, if he can't be helped by anybody else, should be sent directly to me. That is because of the lessons I learned at that time. Because it's very bad, the leaders, to keep away from it. Anyway, Vinoba helped me very much. Then I invited Sri Jayaprakash Narayan to come to Sri Lanka. He came to Sri Lanka twice. I met him in India. Then in India I met a lot of great men like Frontier Gandhi and Dr. E.F. Schumacher and such people. At that time there were so many scholars who were interested to see that a different kind of world emerged after the Second World War. So that way I would learn from everybody. But what we did in Sri Lanka was completely as a result of our dialogues. We have a problem, how can we deal with it? We had groups like this, we call them family gatherings. Then of course there were people who wrote down this stuff and made a philosophy out of it, and that way we grew over a period of 50 years. So all these things can influence us, our karma, our environment, our own determination, then other influences we get from society. All these things help me. So whatever I am doing or Sarvodaya is doing is indebted to so many people in the world. When tsunami came from this country, how much? About $1 million? 3.5 million dollars was sent by unknown people from this country. $10, $25 like that. And we put every dollar to a good use. Published thick account of every cent we received and how we spent that money, and where they want to, if they want to go and see, they will go and see those things. So I'm happy that I got this opportunity to think aloud with you and share whatever experiences I could with you. Here is Shishir Kanal from Nepal. He was a student doing his masters or postgraduate or whatever. During tsunami, he went to help our Sarvodaya group in Wisconsin. Then he came to Sri Lanka. Then it so happened we asked him to be the executive director of Sarvodaya. There's a board here, and so he has been extremely helpful. And now he has started it in Nepal also. And I remember before I came to know him, when I went to Nepal, I persuaded those people to, I had little money, I gave it and said start a school, and that is very well developed now, and Shishir is helping them. And for the first time he said after 1 year of struggle, at last I would succeeded in establishing Sarvodaya in Nepal. So he is doing work there and work here as well. So I'd like to thank him for driving me around, and there's another friend who couldn't come. He was cooking and feeding me like at home. So I'm very well looked after. Thank you again. Thank you very much. I invite all of you, if you get an opportunity, to get in touch with him and come to Sri Lanka and see what we are doing. There are lots of universities sending students to us, and they are given credit for the period they are spending there. Like the international school did a master's degree with us there for 1 year. That's the longest period we had, but I would have liked them to do it differently, but they did it the way they wanted. Now we have Sarvodaya Institute of Higher Education. We don't call it a university, but Institute of Higher Education, so that those who are in higher education coming can have their equals there and learn and share experiences. So thank you again. Thank you very much.